and welcome to this What Happens Next interview. I am really pleased to be joined by not only one of my favourite people, but also somebody who's very knowledgeable around financial well-being, helping us navigate the world of money that, as we know, can be quite scary, and highlighting some of the elements that we need to think about when we're thinking about what happens next in our lives, and making sure money is an empowering force and not a barrier to navigating positive change. Martha, how are you?
I'm really well. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me on.
I'm really pleased. I'm
Yeah,
really looking forward to
good.
this conversation. Um, Before now, I know all about you clearly, and there's a reason you're here. But so our audience know a little bit about you. Tell us a
Sure.
little bit about you.
Yeah, so I have been in various capacities helping people to have a happier and healthier relationship with money for about 18 years now. A lot of that's been financial education. I've done some awareness raising campaigns around things like debt advice and loan sharks and that kind of stuff. I now work as a financial coach. So I help individuals and couples to get to grips with how they manage money and how they make the choices they make and how they can be happier with the choices that they're making with their finances. So that's something that I particularly am right now. I'm enjoying working with couples. I've been doing some couples work recently. That's been really,
How
really
does the
fun.
dynamic change when you work with a couple as opposed to an individual?
So when you're working with an individual, it's just how does that person think and feel about their money? How do they make their choices? When there is a couple, you've got not just each individual, but you've got what each person thinks about what the other person is doing.
Yeah, it's the dynamic, isn't it? The
It's
dynamic of the relationship.
the
It's interesting.
dynamic of the relationship is in there. And if you change something for one person, it changes the dynamic.
Interesting.
So you have to be aware of that. And actually, a lot of the time, it's about working with the dynamic rather than working with either individual person's perception.
Yeah.
So that is, I'm really enjoying doing that. I think it's actually really powerful to help people argue less about money. I think
Yeah,
that's
it's an
really, really
interesting one,
great.
isn't it? It's an
Yeah,
interesting one.
yeah.
And where does that start? So when you've got a couple sitting down in
Mm,
front of you, they're thinking about having a healthier relationships
yeah,
in the couple, because
yeah.
I'd imagine, I mean, I may be putting my own, we are the stories we tell ourselves. And I
Mhm.
think about my mum and dad's relationship with money, and they used to argue
Mm,
about money a lot, and it meant that effectively they had a less, their relationship was less positive because of
mm,
money.
mm.
I've sort of tried to fix that and have a bit more of an open and honest relationship with
Mm.
cash. We've got different
Yeah,
skills when it comes to money.
exactly. Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but 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 where does that conversation start for you? You've got a couple sitting in front
yeah,
of you. They've not got a good relationship about communicating about money.
yeah.
What's the first question that kicks off that conversation, do you think?
So the two things that I'll do. One, I'll say thank you so much for coming in. Thank you both of you for coming in to see me. And I'll reinforce the fact that by coming in to see me, they are clearly committed to each other in the relationship. And that just emphasizing to them that they value the relationship
Yeah, yeah.
gives them a bit more courage to then say, okay, we're going to have to do some hard work. Both of you are
Yeah.
going to have to do some hard work to get
And
through
part of it is,
this. And you're doing it because you value this relationship and you want it to work.
and
And
I'd
that
imagine
just,
part of it is committed to personal change as well, isn't it?
yeah,
It's like it's not easy sitting
absolutely.
in front of somebody like you. Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. So I'll sort of validate the fact they're doing this and the courage, and I might talk a little bit about how it takes uh, some some courage to do this stuff.
Yeah.
But also that they potentially have complementary skills. So if they do things different ways, there might be times when that'll be because they've got complementary skills and they've got complementary attitudes. And when things are going well, those complementary things feel like compliments. And when things are harder, they feel like conflicts.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
So if when things are easier, then it feels like a team with different skills. And when things are harder, you start finding the exact same things you like about the person. The flip side is the things that drive you nuts.
Yeah, really interesting.
Of the same
I particularly when it comes to money, I'm oversharing at the minute, Martha, but I will just for the. I think I'm very good at big picture. I can do detail, but it doesn't interest me that now. I'm about longer term goals, plans, hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Cassie's amazing at detail.
Yeah.
And it's in the point you raise is really interesting because sometimes Cass will mention something and I'll go, I don't need to know that as part of the big picture broader plan, but I'm definitely glad she deals with it. Do you know what I mean? It's that element of just being grateful for the fact that you don't need to worry about it most of the time because somebody else is doing that. I suppose we get to a point where our different perspectives, I think the starting point for a lot of this is we're not right. And there might be a different perspective that adds value to the way we see the world, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'd imagine when people tend to be sitting with you, they're at a point when they're ready to make change.
Yes. Yeah. And actually helping them to understand something about how it feels to go through change, how to support each other through times of change. I do quite a lot of empathy and compassion based exercises early on, and I do that with individuals as well, because individuals who are changing also need to show themselves some empathy and compassion and not judge themselves when any change is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But it's more important with couples because it's bad enough being hard on yourself. It's more frustrating when you're not supported by the person who is supposed to have your back and supposed to love you. So helping people to understand and have that, like I said, empathy and compassion, and build that first, and then we start getting into nitty-gritty actual financial stuff and what do you want to change and how we're going to do that.
Be kind to yourself and to each other is the starting point, isn't it?
And understand, when somebody's behavior looks a little frustrating and they're not doing what they thought they should do and they're not getting it done, what's going on there, and how can we show some understanding and support in a constructive way at that point.
Love that. You made a really interesting point about starting with the acknowledgement of how difficult talking about money is. And I had a really interesting conversation with a lady earlier in the week. So this was Monday and we're now on Wednesday. She's a lawyer, very accomplished in her field, very successful.
Yep.
And said to me, I know I've got to organise this stuff, but I've been putting it off for ages. Now, I know you talk on your website, funny enough, about successful adults who are successful in one aspect of our lives, but just don't choose to ignore the money bit, even though they knew it could do with a bit of TLC. What are what's holding back those people?
Oh, so I think we can think about, this is a common thing. It's not just successful people, right? But there is some additionals, but everybody does it, right? But when it comes to people who are very successful, I think of this as almost like a financial imposter syndrome, where you've got you're giving out this outward image of success, including financial success, right? But underlying it, there's this kind of maybe anxious, embarrassed, slightly struggling person who doesn't really know what they're doing. And the difference between those things is bigger the more successful that you are, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes more scary. You're kind of scared that if you own up to how much you've been ignoring or not planning or whatever your finances, you're somehow being found out, right?
Yeah.
which is a bit scary.
There's an element of when I suppose when people trust you in one aspect, it's difficult to be vulnerable at times, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think, there are sort of the general reasons that lots of people have for not doing it, which is basically that, like, there's a long-term benefit to doing something like your financial planning or really working on anything around your finances. But then there are lots of short-term reasons not to. And the long-term reasons can feel a bit unreal and far away. And the short-term reasons are right here and now. Right?
Yeah.
So there is always something more enjoyable to do with your time right here, right now. There's knock-on effects. If I change this in order to improve my finances, is there something else about my life I'm going to have to change right here, right now that I don't want to change in order to get a benefit, in 20 years' time with my money? Is changing something about my finances going to reveal some truth to me that I don't want to face? Right?
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yeah. And that might not be a truth that you or I would think of as a bad thing. Right? So, for example, I know you work with quite a lot of entrepreneurs or people who've built successful businesses. If you had a self-conception as somebody who's kind of a scrappy underdog, and that's always been your image of yourself, and then you do your financial planning and you find out you're really quite wealthy.
Yeah.
That's a real mess with your mind and your image of yourself.
I've been thinking about this quite a lot, because I think there is certainly with our clients, there's a, and I think about my story as well. There's that element of working class hero that isn't working class anymore.
Yeah.
And I think an element of it, and I'd have to speak to a couple of my clients about this. You're worried about losing that energy you had when it mattered more. Do you know what I mean? It was like, why do we get up in the morning if we don't need to? I think there's an element of not only the financial question, but there's a deeper identity question
Ding, ding, ding,
that
ding,
we
ding,
need
ding,
to
ding.
re-examine.
Exactly. And here's the thing about that. I was hoping you would, because, right, there's a tiny melodramatic part of our inner selves, our minds. It's not a conscious part of ourselves, but there's this tiny little bit of ourselves that when your self-image has to change, if you don't have a new, positive, clear self-image to move towards, it feels like you're dying. The person that I am, that I think of myself as being, is not going to be anymore, and I'm going to be somebody different. If you know who the somebody different is that you're going to be, that's okay. You can move into that because you're being reborn. But if you don't know what your new self-conception is, you're like, well, the person I am right now is going to vanish.
Yeah. And it's part of the reason that when we're thinking, when I was thinking about the What Happens Next model, purpose and values and identity sits in the middle of the model. Not money. Purpose, value, and identity, because I completely get that. I completely get the fact that if we've been this, if this has been our identity, and we're thinking about change, part of the reason we put it off is because we're not clear on like what.
Who am I after this change?
But I suppose the challenge, and we've interviewed people on What Happens Next, and it's been really interesting actually. The part of the challenge is when challenge is forced on you, right? So part of the challenge, and we've interviewed a few people on What Happens Next who talk about this. I suppose what I'm trying to encourage a conversation around with What Happens Next is taking ownership of that change so that you're ready when it happens, or choosing to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Often when changes falls upon us, we go through a cycle that means that we're in a position where it's often a lot more difficult, right?
Yeah, that's then you're in that almost like the grief kind of process, and it's a much more challenging kind of place.
You lose it.
Yeah.
So what's holding us back is there's always something more urgent to do.
There's always something more urgent to do, or more enjoyable to do. Yeah.
Always something more fun to do. What do we need to do to make sure that we're dealing with it?
Yeah. So there is something about, so coming back to that identity and self-image thing, learning emphasizing what the benefits are and seeing how you can bring those benefits, make them more immediate, make them sooner.
Yeah.
That stuff is really, really valuable.
Bring it closer, right?
Bring it closer. Make it more real. Try and get as detailed an image of what that looks like as possible. So the more that we can see in really quite a detailed, granular way, the more that we can kind of get into the sensory experience almost of it. That can be really, really good. Where do I want to be? What do I want to be doing? What does my time look like? Think sort of the experiments of that stuff. There's a fun timeline exercise that I've seen some people do where they'll write a letter to their future self after the change has happened. Put it down for a little bit and let that mull. Don't try and think about it. Just kind of put it down and then write a letter back.
Interesting.
So you write a letter to that
from
future self,
to the person
from your future self. Yeah, exactly. So you write the future self and you say, hey, what's going on in your life and how can I get to where you are? So you imagine that your future self is living a really great future life. Write them a letter and say, what's going on with you and how can I get to where you are and what do I need to do now?
That is such a good exercise.
Yeah.
Future. Oh, I'm going to do that. I really like that.
Yeah.
Life letter. Great. Okay. Perfect. Really enjoy it. Really think that's worthwhile. And I suppose one of the things, and again, going back to this sort of this conversation I had earlier in the week, one of the things, and you've mentioned it already, we typically have in our minds when we're avoiding conversations about money is everybody else knows what they're doing, so that imposter syndrome feels even stronger.
Right? Yes.
So let's be open and honest, Martha. I've got a financial plan. It's fairly on track. I'm learning every day about money, and I've worked in the profession for 20 odd years. What do we need to do to potentially change our mindset?
Our mindset around this. Everyone knows how to do this, and not me. Everyone's sorted, not me. Okay, so first things first, right? Everyone, no one, always, never. All or nothing speak, right?
Yeah.
Spot it. Everyone? Really, everyone? Are you sure, everyone? It's a sign of a thought that is unhelpful and untrue.
Polarized thinking is never
helpful. Yeah. So everyone, no one, always, never, any of those kind of words, spot them. Something is lying to you. So something is untrue there. So there's that one. The next one is, so if you think about this, it's clearly untrue, right? How would everybody else be good at this and not you? Are you like so monumentally less competent than everyone else? No, you're patently not. Did everybody else get to go to secret special personal finance school and everybody else got to go to and you didn't get to go to? No. Is everybody else dealing with a less complicated financial services system than you? No, we're all dealing with the UK financial services. It's complicated. It changes all the time. The regulatory landscape, tax landscape, everything changes all the time. We're all dealing with that. So there isn't a reason why everybody else would be good at this and not you. Clearly. Even more important though, there's all of that, right? But we can actually ditch all of that, because the really relevant thing is, why do you care what everyone else can do? You are on your journey. It doesn't matter how good everybody else is or isn't. What matters is, what do you need to do? What do you need to know? What experts do you need to consult?
Love that. You know what, and again, this probably took me a while to get to in my life, but just that removal of comparison with what everybody else is doing. And if I'm being frank, it sneaks in every now and again. And then I've got to turn around and go, what if I'm happy, but that comparative behavior, I mean, that quote, comparison is the thief of joy, is so true, because you turn around and go, as long as you're happy with what you're doing, why does it matter? And you're clear about where you're going. Once you've done your letters from your future self to your past self, what matters? What does it matter what Steve's doing or whoever's doing? What matters is your path.
Exactly. There's a line.
How do we challenge that voice?
Oh, well, hopefully we've just come up with a couple of things that can help to challenge that voice. So listening out, is this an all or nothing? It's an all or nothing. So everyone, that's probably not everyone then. We can think about, where do I think this has come from? Like, why do I have this impression? The idea of, everyone can do this and not me, we're often comparing all the private information we have about ourselves with what's public about everybody else. And that's edited, right? What people make public, particularly around their finances.
There's
an awful lot of people who are hiding things, as well. So
I read a book a couple of weeks ago that I absolutely love, that talks about all of these mental traps we fall into, and how we can think about them in a different way. It's a book called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before, by a psychologist called Dr. Judy Smith. Now, she's amazing. If you're on LinkedIn or I'm not on any other social media, so LinkedIn, or apparently she's on TikTok, but she's brilliant at doing bite-sized chunks of evidence-based psychological techniques that we can do. So the book's really good, and it's got a whole chapter on that inner voice and the lies it tells herself, and one of them is polarized thinking. One of them is that element of turning around and going, it's either 100% good, 100% bad. It's either black or white. And we all live in a world where it's shades of grey, right? And the more we appreciate that,
and many other multicolours.
Shades of grey, green, blue, orange, purple, whatever colour you want.
Whatever colour you like,
yeah. But the more we other colours are available, but the more, because I think I missed some. But the more we recognise that. The more we recognise nuance in every area of our lives, the healthier conversations are, right? And that's the clear factor. However, with anything in our lives, sometimes we need a bit of help. And for those of us who understand what somebody like me does, financial advisor / planner, although there's a bit of a miscomprehension about what we do. There's also a growing profession of financial coaches, which is slightly different. What do you see the differences? And help me understand a little bit about what somebody would understand to see whether they needed a coach or a regulated financial planner or advisor.
So I see financial coaching as the process of exploring how someone makes financial choices with the aim of helping them become happier with the choices they make.
Yeah.
So that's really that's it in a nutshell. We're thinking about how you make your financial choices and helping you feel more comfortable, more confident, and just overall happier with the choices that you're making.
Yeah.
So it's not so much product based. It's not so much there is obviously some elements of planning, and I will sometimes help people to understand products or understand some of the factors in the decisions they might have to make. But a lot of it is goals, motivation, influences, the role of money in your relationships, whether or not you've got a partner with you in the room, as it were, but actually, what is the role of money in your relationships right now, and are you happy with that? Your values, your ethics, your habits, and how are those things working for you in your day-to-day around money? So where you are going to be, yes, taking sometimes a coaching approach to things and actually working with somebody about their values and goals and motivations and so on, but ultimately you're doing that in order to construct a plan, thinking really long term, very much focused on so those practical technical decisions. I'm thinking about, how does somebody think or feel about money? Where do they have a block where they don't want to engage with a particular aspect of it? Where are they repeatedly doing something that they don't want to do? They keep falling into the same mistake over and over. How can we get them past that? How are they handling their everyday money that might be a bit granular and small for you? You're thinking, again, as you say, kind of big picture a lot of the time about the overall plan.
I love that differentiation, and what I've been thinking a lot about is the stories we tell ourselves about money. How often in your work do you hear something and you realise that that's probably a story.
That's a story you're
perhaps
telling
told you.
yourself.
Yeah, when does that happen? And provide me with an example when that might occur.
Okay. So this is a story that happened recently. I had a client who was telling me about we almost had like a two stories in one with this one, right? They told me about a really common issue that they have. It's an issue that loads of people have, where they felt very overwhelmed with all the different changes they were going to have to make, because they were overspending in various ways, and they weren't in debt, but they weren't happy, and they weren't building any assets of any kind. And they felt like they were wasting a lot of money. It's a really common thing that people come to me about. But they felt like the small changes were too small to be worth making, and the big changes were too overwhelming and stressful to start on. So they kept sort of leaving themselves with it was catch-22. They were leaving with themselves with no space to do anything, right? So, I was helping them to understand that, well, we'll practice on the small changes, and that will help you build up towards the bigger ones. And you might be surprised how the progress you make with the small things actually compounds and builds, and actually that's going to, all of that stuff. But before I could even get into that, I said, oh, so what it sounds like to me from what you're saying is you feel like the small changes are too small to bother with, and the big changes are too big and scary and overwhelming. And they nodded, and I said, that's really common. Loads of people come to me and say that. And the client went, I thought I was special. I've always seen, that's disappointing. Now, most people find it so reassuring when you say this is a really common problem. Loads of people have this issue. You're not alone. It's, for most people, that's a big relief. That person had a self-conception of themselves as being unique and a very deep,
unique with that particular challenge.
Well, and unique in general, just a very deep, complicated person. And therefore they expected their problems to be deep, complicated problems. And unfortunately, they might be a very deep and complicated person in some ways, but actually they had a problem in this case that was really relatable to loads of other people. It's something that everybody,
Yeah, and
lots of people
again,
have.
it goes back to identity, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
I've got this unique issue that I'm really going to have to work
I'm
hard
going to
to
have to
solve.
struggle so hard with.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And there's so interesting. The story.
So,
I mean, maybe the story they're telling themselves is they need to struggle to make positive change. Maybe that.
I think the story that they were telling themselves was they were too unique and special to change.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That they had a problem that was too big, too complicated, too unmanageable and unchangeable because it was so big. And it was when I said, actually, you've brought in your description of it, you've brought a lot of insight to that, and a lot of, you were able to articulate it much better than a lot of people. So I was still a bit like, you're special in some ways.
Yeah.
But the problem itself is a problem that comes up a lot, and the solution is to do the small things and trust to the process that they will change.
Yeah, and there's a snowball effect, right? The small things
exactly.
I know, automating your direct debits, or doing something that's really practically small, and you think, well, that will take years to have an impact. Actually, it snowballs over time and builds up.
Yeah, exactly.
When you put more and more habits on there, I really like that. And I suppose we have got a tendency as humans to self-validate, haven't we?
Oh yeah.
Why? And what an amazing self-validation. The reason I haven't changed is because I'm too complicated.
I'm too complicated and unique.
Quite a positive validation, isn't it? Like, to validate that not changing, but
but people build up all sorts of these, defenses and stories around why change isn't possible for them. And you get so many different narratives. You get actually it's another one linked to kind of imposter syndrome stuff. I can't possibly charge more for my work because if I do, people will investigate whether they're getting value more, and then they'll find out I'm not really as good as I say I am, and then then they'll sack me completely. So that's like one that you get, is I don't deserve to charge more, and that's sort of a fear of being found out as not as good as you actually think you are. I don't deserve to enjoy my money. Oh, bless you. If I'm not a good provider, I'm nothing. I'm worthless. Yeah. That's the big one. You hear that one a lot. You get all sorts of things. There's so many of these different stories, and the real challenge with stories is that to the person who's holding on to the story, they might not even be aware of the message. So what they just see is they take a decision automatically. The decision is based in one of these stories, but they don't even notice the story flashes past them so fast they don't even notice they've just made the decision, because it feels right or it feels wrong to do a certain thing, so they just make the decision. They don't hear the story. You unpick, how did you come to that choice? And you get to the story, but they don't know it's a story. They just think, this is just the truth about me.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful when I as you know, because you've known me long enough now, I love a good story. I love telling a good story.
Yeah.
Right? And you've read my book, and you know that I tell loads of stories in the book. Just to be clear, none of those stories are facts, right? No story I tell is ever a fact, right? What it is an interpretation that I've refined over time to get the reaction I want.
Sure.
And normally it's I try and make them funny, or try to make a pertinent point, or but they've been refined over time. And I came to this realization probably last year, probably quite recently, that if none of my stories are facts, actually they're open to debate about how true they are.
Yeah.
And sometimes we, and I'm probably guilty of this as much as anybody, we do think our stories are facts and live our lives by this defined. And it's interesting when you turn around and go, well, hold on, I told that story differently 2 years ago. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that I've been lucky enough to do, and I think I told stories on there, is come on your podcast, because your podcast is
Yes.
amazing. So tell us a
Oh,
little bit about
thank you.
your podcast, and what
Oh.
I'd like to know
Mm.
is what the reason I love doing this is I get to learn, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
when I interview people about kindness, I get to learn a lot. This is really teaching me what I need to think about for when I need to consider what happens next in a few years' time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
what have you learned from
Oh.
interviewing the amount of people you have on your podcast?
Ooh. So there are things that I think, oh, these were some particularly like amazing episodes that I really loved just in general. They weren't necessarily personally applicable, but I thought they were just really, really, really great. Will Rainey talking about children and money. Now I don't have kids. Probably never going to have kids, but it was a great episode in terms of just really useful information and really interesting. Quite an early one we did with a guy called Jasper Lyons, where he talked about getting paid properly for your time, whether you're pricing as a self-employed person or whether you are negotiating salary. That was a really useful one. That gave me some insights I hadn't had.
So
Um,
here's the interesting thing on that. A lot of the
mm,
people who are thinking about what happens next
yeah.
are moving from environments where they've not had to worry about being paid for their time because they've been senior management in
Hmm.
a particular organisation.
Yeah.
And one of the things they might consider, maybe for their financial well-being, but also for their intellectual well-being, is consulting or doing
Consulting.
non-executive
Yeah.
directing. So,
Yeah.
what tips did Jasper share that were really useful in that particular space?
Well, his main thing was that what you're charging is based on the value or the perceived value from the customer's perspective.
Yeah,
It's not about you. It's about
yeah,
what they
that the
perceive as.
value you add.
It's
Yeah,
about the value you add. And it's really easy to start thinking from your own perspective, well, I've got this and I've got that. I bring this many years of experience. Or no, it's what problem are you solving? What is that problem costing the client? And therefore, what might they be willing to pay you to solve that
yeah,
problem?
yeah, yeah,
So that for me was just a really, really useful one. And then he also did some good tips on salary negotiation for people who are maybe at a different stage in their career from your senior execs that mostly will be pretty expert in that already. But somebody a bit younger might really want some of those sort of tips on salary
yeah.
negotiation. I
And
think were really good.
working that also, in my experience running a business and having to think about pricing quite a lot,
Mm,
also makes it clear about where you don't add value.
mm,
Because I think actually having had a conversation this week with a client where we got to the end of the conversation, I helped as much as I could,
mm,
and then said, "You really shouldn't engage me as your financial planner because I
mm-hmm.
can't add enough value to validate my fee."
Yeah.
But being clear on where the value lies, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because with value, some of it's tangible and some of it
Mm,
actually is about the conversations and the curiosity and helping people
yeah.
find their own answers, and that is probably a bit more
Yeah.
difficult to put a price on. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, thinking about the value you add is really important.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So that was one. Will Rainey
That
and
was
the one
one.
we
Will
did.
Rainey was one. One that I think, again, in the what happens next world might be good. Patrick Hill. Now, he was talking about recovering from losing a job. And he was talking about that. We recorded that in 2021. It was one of the first things we did after lockdown started, and ended, and we started being able to come back into workplaces. And Patrick was talking a lot about, take situations where somebody might have lost a job or been made redundant or whatever it might be. But there are still some really, really good tips in there about identity, and you're using your time and what things might come up for you without work in your life.
Love
Um,
that.
and so also Patrick is just the most lovely person. He's amazing. He's like a the most like a Zen master who's just really into Kylie Minogue.
It's a combination. That's a
Yeah,
brilliant combination.
it's a brilliant
Yeah,
combination. He's
love
just a
that.
delight. He's absolutely a delight.
But Patrick, and what we'll do is when we share this,
Mm,
if there's notes, we'll make sure we put links to the podcast on that.
yeah,
Because I absolutely love that. So we've talked about the stories. What
yeah,
I want to sort of focus on is a sort of that element of what happens next, thinking
yeah,
about making change in our lives,
yes.
and ensuring that we continue whilst our situation changes to maintain high
Mm,
levels of financial well-being.
yeah, yeah.
Because clearly, and we experience it with our clients quite a lot, despite them us building them a financial plan and helping them understand that they're going to be okay and
Mhm,
they've built enough wealth to make sure that they're never going to run out again.
mhm,
On some occasions, there's still a road to get there.
mhm,
Um, there's still that element of change that then reduces their financial well-being for a while because
mhm.
it's like, well, I'm used to the money coming into the bank every month,
Yep,
or
yeah.
um, and their situation has changed that made them reduce the level of comfort they got. So
Mhm.
talk to me about your tips about maintaining high levels of well-being whilst going
Mm,
through change.
while going through change. So a few things. So financial well-being, I think of it, and I'm sure you do too, as managing your finances with the aim of enhancing your overall well-being. So the money is a tool to get you to overall
100%.
well-being, right? It's that way round. Um, so for me, it's about what will enhance or maintain. What's the most important factors in enhancing and maintaining your well-being in the rest of your life as you go through this change, knowing that all change, even positive change, is stressful. So you might need to put a little bit extra attention on the things that help you cope with stress. Um, because when you change anything, you have to redraw your mental map of the world, and your place in it, and that experience is stressful, even if we're dealing with a positive change.
Yeah.
Um, so what supports you and your well-being in times of stress? And how can you focus your resources, your time, your attention, your energy, and your money on the things that really support you through that process? And maybe you'll have to let go of some other things that weren't as important. Maybe you're going to let go of some other kinds of expenses or other kinds of activities that you're not necessarily as higher focus and as supportive for you in that time.
So
Um,
so let me give you a practical example, right?
mm,
So
go
I'm
for it.
buying a house at the
Yeah.
minute, which is a positive change for me and my family.
Yeah.
The reason I haven't done it in 17 years, Martha, is because
Terrible.
it's a pain.
It's
It's
horrible.
honestly, it's such a pain.
It's the worst.
Um,
Yeah.
and that I mean, again, you talk about positive change financially. It's definitely a positive change,
Yeah.
and will give us the lifestyle we're looking for in terms of where we're moving and things like that. But like that change period is like, oh God, I love that suggestion. I love that suggestion of focus on what enhances your well-being. And where my head went, and this is why
Mm,
the what happens next model doesn't only include money, right? And this is the important thing about change is friends,
yep.
social well-being,
Yep.
because that makes me really happy,
Number
spending
one.
time with people I love and like.
Number one. Yep.
Um, not talking about the change, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not ignoring it. I know it's happening, but focusing my energies
Have some
on just
time
keeping
off.
those
Yeah.
friendships. Yeah.
Yeah.
And physical well-being.
Yeah.
So meditation, fitness,
Yeah.
all of the elements that I know improves my well-being. So do you think we can improve our financial well-being by focusing on our social and physical well-being? And are they all interlinked?
I think they're very interlinked, but I also think that when you understand what it is that brings you the most well-being, so what enhances your well-being the most for you personally, you can, by focusing your money, your attention, your energy on those things,
Yeah.
you will be more comfortable to let go of other kinds of spending.
Yeah. Yeah.
It helps you to prioritize. If you have to prioritize what's going on with your money, when you know what brings you the greatest well-being, you know other things are not a priority. What am I doing that I'm doing habitually? What am I doing to fit in? I'm just doing it because everybody else does it, but I don't really get anything out of it. What am I doing? Because I used to enjoy it 20 years ago, and I'm kind of used to doing it, but actually, what's just not actually that important, and you can kind of let it go. And then that enhances your well-being. You also, when you know what the things are that enhance your well-being, you can look for the kind of best things in life for free element of that. So what are the things that actually enhance your well-being you don't have to spend money on? And again, that leaves you feeling richer on the same money.
Yeah. No, I get that. And part of the conversations we have with clients is always like, what do you value? And I've been guilty of it, sort of think in the past. You always undervalue the people you like and love in terms of the positive impact on their well-being. And you can go for a walk in the park for free, can't you? It's like that sort of. What do you do to do that? I suppose the other really interesting point on that is, what are we told? What are we marketed at in terms of the things that are going to make us happy, when like a lived experience might tell us more about what the actual impact is? What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. We're told everything is a must. Everything is necessary. Everything is a must. If you don't have the latest and best version, your friends won't like you anymore. You won't be part of the group. That's actually, yes. So marketing will make you feel like everybody is paying attention to the details of your stuff and your lifestyle to a way greater extent than they do. People are not paying that much attention to it most of the time. You know who pays attention to that kind of detail level? Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, right? He's sitting analyzing the business cards, that infamous scene, right? That's who's paying that much attention and judging you that much. But the people that you want in your life are not doing that.
But also the people who our worst critic often is us, right?
And absolutely,
I think it's quite a freeing principle when we realise that nobody else cares. It's like you go. I think you go through that little hump of saying, actually, I wish they would, and then you realise, well, actually, it gives you quite a decent amount of freedom if they don't care, because you can live the life more that's more authentically yours.
Exactly. And that's one of the great things about what happens next, right? Because when you are living on, when you're in that, you call it decumulation stage, right? You're living on your investments. You've got enough money for the rest of your life. You're not financially dependent on other people. That financial independence. There might be a professional persona that you had to keep up. You don't have to keep that up anymore. You can express some different parts of yourself, or even experiment with. You don't have to kind of fully go out and go all, like that Jenny Joseph poem, and I will wear purple, right? You don't always have to be that person.
You know what,
but you can just try it out a bit.
You know what? I don't think people care when you have got a professional persona. Do you know what I mean? Like sort of. I think if I think about how my clients perceive me, says the man who wears his second-hand jumper. That how they perceive me. How many clients actually? And no, that's probably not true. There's probably clients who have chosen not to work with me because their expectation of what a financial planner should look like might be different.
Sure.
I'm not losing out on that.
Yeah.
And actually, I think, as you say, I agree with you. I think not what we worry about it less as we get older. Number one, we worry about it less when our careers aren't as dependent on it. Number two, but I do wonder whether we worry about it too much unnecessarily earlier in life as well. I don't know.
I think that can be the case. I think it depends a lot on your profession and the environment that you're in and where you're working, who you're working with,
it's
and all that
culture,
kind of.
isn't it?
It's really it really varies in the culture.
There are some cultures, and areas of the world where it's a bit more relaxed and a little more formal, which is why I don't spend that much time in the city anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have to put up a particular front of looking very, assertive and having a particular kind of persona because you've got to get things done in a certain way?
Yeah, it's interesting.
And you actually just want to be a bit sort of looser and more creative and more vulnerable, and that's not necessarily going to get things done in the whatever it might be. You can just kind of experiment.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really interesting debate. And the point you make about thinking about what happens next and giving yourself that freedom, there's two things that I want to sort of think about. Number one is when we're working, we've got this amazing track to run on, which potentially restricts our options, but makes our lives easier.
Yep.
I've had a few conversations recently, and one with a new client of mine who said to me, Chris, the reason I'm here is because I can do anything I want, but doing everything I want feels quite scary. So there's that paradox of choice element where you turn around and go, I can wear my tracksuit bottoms at 24 hours a day, but is that so how do we, when we're thinking about what's next, how do we get the choices we make? How do we restrict our choices to a certain extent when all the barriers are off? To make sure we're doing something.
Make sure we're doing something. That's a really big question, right? I think we can treat things as little experiments. Start small and do a little experiment in something. So just rather than saying I'm going to take a direction out of the infinite directions that I have because I can do anything, instead saying I'm going to experiment this week with trying this, seeing how I get on with it. How do I feel about it? I'm going to experiment, this month, whatever however long you feel like is the necessary for you to get to answer a question, but ask yourself a question. What's a question you want to answer? How do I feel about becoming a potter? Let's go and throw some clay.
Try it.
Let's try it. If it doesn't work,
if it doesn't work, it's a no, isn't it? And you can close that door, and
exactly,
it's an option. But I really like that. One of my favorite books when that I recommend a lot to clients is Design Your Life by Bill Burnett. He talks a lot about using design thinking, iterating your life. By just trying stuff and either liking it and including it as part of your life portfolio or not. And I really like that model.
I've got another one actually that's really, really helpful. What do you hate? What can you absolutely, categorically and immediately say, definitely not this?
Yeah.
And like can you find some themes from the things you really don't want?
What do you hate and why?
And why? Can you
what
find
else does that close?
Yeah. Exactly. So can you find themes like I'm so sorry. I don't want this. I didn't like this. I didn't like this. I didn't like this. Those three were all involved being cold and wet. Right. I don't want any pastime that involves being cold and wet. Thank you very much. We're not doing those.
Yeah.
We'll do pastimes that keep me on solid ground. Thank you very much.
Are you talking
Nice and
personally now,
comfy.
Martha? Or are
I
you
actually, I don't mind, but only for short periods of time. I'll
you
go
know
on a
what?
hike, but I don't want a long camping trip with multiple stages of cold and
Yeah,
wet.
yeah. I KSC at the minute is doing a bit of open water swimming,
Oh,
and
yeah.
she's saying I feel fabulous when I come out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like,
Yep.
I don't mind being wet. I quite like swimming, but the cold
Mm.
is just really putting me off. But
It's
anyway,
vicious, isn't it? Yeah.
um,
I also love swimming, but yeah, I'm just I don't want to spend multiple days being physically
gotcha.
uncomfortable in that way. No.
Yeah, no, gotcha. And then I suppose the other thing is like the barriers to thinking about
Yes.
what's next from a financial well-being perspective. So what are
Mm.
the like main worries from clients who come to see you who
Yeah.
know they need to make change either through a process of what
Mm.
happens next or positive change in their lives that stop them, that hold them back?
So am I going to have to so one of the things actually that happens that frustrates people trying to make change is you've got a big change, like what happens next, right? But it's often made up of lots of little changes. And people can be ready to make the big change, like stopping working, but they're not ready to give up or recognize the little changes along the way, like I've got a mate who's technically a work contact, so we always put lunch on expenses. We have really nice lunch, we put that on expenses. And I'm not ready to not have an expense account anymore. And how do I keep meeting up with my
Yeah,
friend?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, this is a really silly example, right?
No,
But
it's good. Pay like the benefits that the small benefits we lose when we change something big,
when we
right?
change something big, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So we have to understand that change is a process that, you've got the big change you could be ready to make and the little changes that kind of hold you back here and there in the moment that you kind of weren't ready for.
yeah,
So there's that one. There is the change in relationships. We started this video talking about couple dynamics and relationship dynamics and what happens next, and the role of money in our relationship will change
yeah, yeah,
when my income changes or the
yeah,
source of my income changes. How will I be perceived by the people around me, specifically with regards to my finances, particularly if the amount of money I have available is going to change? How will that affect the dynamics in those relationships?
yeah,
And yeah, that then makes you confront what has been the role of money in those dynamics, which you might not have considered before. You might not, that might have been something that was just kind of going on under the surface and you never even had to think about it. But now you're confronted by it. And that brings up some stuff because you're having to rethink a relationship that you was running quite nicely, thank you. And there's a
So,
little bit of fear of how will that relationship work in the
so
future.
here's a thought then.
Mm.
Instead of doing the big change first, is it
Mm.
worth experimenting with the little changes over time before you get the big change done? So it might
Yeah.
be like the example you use is do I pay do I pay for my own lunch? Do
Yeah.
I go out with my friend and instead of putting it on the expense account, get used to the fact that I'm not going to be able to do that in the future?
Yeah.
And get over that psychological barrier by just changing the small things first, so the big thing feels less scary. What do you think?
Or change what you do with your friend so that you're not necessarily going to that lunch in that place if you don't want to
Well, I mean, there's
You know, there's like
there is an element there, and it's something we talk about. I've talked about quite a lot throughout the interviews about, and I think, and I don't want to stereotype, but from my lived experience, women are far better at this than men. I went through a period of time in my 30s where all of my social relationships were through work. And Cassie's always maintained friendships that were some at work, but like some friends. And I think, interestingly, the more that I'm speaking to people who are thinking about navigating next, often a lot of their friendships are through work, and changing that dynamic with a bit of time to spare is an interesting one. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's one of the biggest considerations. So who do you want to keep from amongst your work network is also, and how can you nourish that relationship outside of a work context before you stop working?
And that's what it's about. What I've realized about social friendships for me, I've got a mate, Mike, and he's the one who makes loads and loads of effort to get everybody together, and he's the one who wins, because it's like sort of he's the crux of that. So I've started doing that in some of my other friend groups, and go, if you leave it to chance, it will never happen, and we'll get together once a year every Christmas and then realize we haven't seen each other. So just doing regular stuff and being the crux of that, but making the effort, like anything in life, making the effort normally gives you a win. I've loved this conversation, and we could do it forever.
We could,
but I'm sure people watching have got lives that they've got loads of actions they need to take now.
They've got to write their letters to their future selves.
They need to. Well, I need to go off and write my letter. But what I'd love is to share a little bit about you on the interview, so that people can find you if they need to. So where can people find out a bit more about you?
So I am also on LinkedIn, and people can come and find me on LinkedIn, Martha Lawton. You can also find me on my website, which is marthalawton.com.
Perfect.
Very easy. Very easy. And if people think that financial coaching sounds like something that could be useful for them, you can get 30 minutes with me for free just to chat through, see if we're a good fit. If I think we're not, I'll say so. If I don't think I can help you, I'll either suggest someone else to talk to, if some other kind of professional would be good, or I'll say, there might be another coach that I could recommend that would be a better fit, or I'll just say, that sounds great, but maybe not for me. But if I think we're a good fit, brilliant, happy days, and I'd love to work with you. So just there's nothing to lose, really.
Great stuff. Well, thanks for your time. Have a lovely remainder of the week.
You too. It's been great. Thank you so much.